If you're hearing this, it means I chose the wrong man to call. That was the first thing I heard when I pressed play again, alone in my office, long after the city had gone quiet. And even now, I still couldn't decide if it was a warning or a confession. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. when the call first came in, a private line that only a handful of people in this world even knew existed, and none of them were children. None of them had voices that small, that steady, that certain. I remember the room going silent around me, conversations fading, the low hum of business stopping mid-breath. Because I don't ignore that phone. I never have, not once, and yet when I answered, I almost did. Hello. My voice was calm, controlled, the kind of voice that doesn't ask questions it doesn't want answers to. But what came through the other end wasn't fear, not the kind I expected, no screaming, no crying, just a soft inhale, like she had practiced this moment. Please, she said, barely above a whisper, save my mom. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't understand, but because something in the way she said it didn't fit. It didn't match the situation she was describing. And in my world, when something doesn't fit, it means it's either a trap or something far worse. Who is this? I asked, already signaling for silence around me, already watching the men in the room straighten without being told, because they knew that tone, they knew that something had shifted. My name is Lily, she said, and there was a pause, not hesitation, not confusion, but calculation, like she was choosing what to say next very carefully. They're still here. My jaw tightened. Where are you? I stood up without realizing it, my hand already reaching for my jacket, my mind moving faster than the seconds ticking on the clock. She gave me an address. No stuttering. No mistakes. Exact. Precise. Too precise for a child her age. Lily, I said, lowering my voice, put your mom on the phone. Silence. Then, quieter this time, she can't. Something cold settled in my chest. Not panic. I don't panic, but recognition. The kind that tells you this moment is about to change everything whether you want it to or not. How? Did you get this number? I asked, and for the first time, there was a shift in her breathing. Not fear, but something else, something almost like certainty. Because you're the only one who would come. The line went quiet after that. Not disconnected. Just waiting. And for a second, just 1 second, I considered ending the call, walking back into the room, finishing the deal I had spent weeks setting up, the one that would solidify control over half the city by sunrise, the logical choice, the smart choice, the choice I would have made any other night. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because in her voice, there was no doubt, no question, no hope even, just the absolute belief that I would show up, and I don't know what unsettled me more, the situation or the fact that she was right. Stay where you are, I told her, already moving, already knowing there was no going back from this. I'm coming. I left before anyone could ask questions, because questions slow things down and time was the one thing I did not have. And as I stepped out into the cold night air, the city felt different, like it was holding its breath, like it already knew I had just made a decision I could not undo. My driver opened the door without a word, his eyes flicking to mine for half a second, searching for confirmation, but I was already inside, already giving him the address before the door even closed. He hesitated, just slightly, and that was enough to tell me everything. Still there. There was a pause, then a quiet breath. Yes. No fear. No panic. Just presence. It did not make sense. Are you alone? I asked. Another pause, longer this time, like she was deciding whether to tell me the truth. No, she said finally, and my grip on the phone tightened. They are in the other room. My eyes shifted to the window, watching the city blur past, calculating distance, time, possibilities, all the ways this could go wrong. Listen to me carefully, I said, my tone sharpening just enough to cut through whatever calm she was holding on to. Stay somewhere they cannot see you. Do not make noise. Do not open the door for anyone except me. How will I know it is you? She asked. And there it was, the first crack, not fear, but something close to it, something human. I will say your name, I replied, and you will open the door. Silence again, then a small, almost imperceptible exhale. Okay, just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the engine, the faint sound of breathing on the other end of the line, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. This was not just a call for help. This was an invitation into something deeper, something that had already begun the moment she said my name. And whether I wanted it or not, I was already part of it. I stepped out of the car into air that felt heavier than it should have, like the night itself was pressing down on the street, and for a second I just stood there, looking up at the building, counting windows, exits, shadows, anything that could tell me what I was about to walk into before I actually did. "Wait here," I said without turning, already knowing my driver would not argue, because he understood that some doors you do not walk through with an audience. The phone was still in my hand, still connected, still carrying the faint sound of breathing from the other side. And as I crossed the street, my shoes hitting the pavement in slow, measured steps, I realized that was the only sound guiding me forward. "Lily," I said quietly, keeping my voice low as I reached the entrance, a narrow hallway dimly lit by a flickering overhead light that buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive. "I am here." There was a pause, longer than before, and I felt something tighten in my chest, something close to anticipation, or maybe it was something else entirely. "Second floor," she whispered. "Door on the left." I moved up the stairs without hesitation, each step deliberate, controlled, my senses sharpening with every inch, the kind of focus that comes when you know one wrong move could change everything. The building was too quiet, not the normal quiet of late hours, but the kind that feels intentional, like it had been emptied of sound on purpose, and that alone told me this was not random, this was not simple, this was something planned. When I reached the second floor, I stopped for a second, listening, not for noise, but for absence, for anything that did not belong, and then I saw it. The door was slightly open, not wide enough to invite, not closed enough to protect, just enough to suggest someone had left. In a hurry, or wanted it to look that way. My grip on the phone tightened. "Lily," I said, softer now, closer. "I am at the door." Silence. Then, almost immediately, footsteps, light, careful, approaching from inside, and the door opened just a few more inches until I could see her. She was smaller than I expected, maybe 7, maybe 8, her hair pulled back unevenly like she had done it herself, her eyes wide but not panicked, not lost, just aware. Too aware. She looked up at me like she had been waiting for this exact moment, like she already knew what I would look like before I even spoke. "You said my name," she said quietly, her voice steady despite everything, and for a second, I forgot how to respond, because there was no fear in her eyes, only recognition. "Yes," I answered, lowering my voice as I stepped closer, not crossing the threshold yet, not until I understood what I was stepping into. "Where is your mom?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she stepped back slowly, opening the door just enough for me to see inside, and what I saw did not match the story I had built in my head during the drive over. The room was not destroyed. There was no chaos, no signs of panic, just stillness, controlled, intentional, and that was when I understood. This was not a situation that had just happened. This was something that had been waiting. "They left," she said finally, her voice softer now, almost like she was admitting something she was not sure she should. "But they said they might come back." My eyes moved past her, scanning the room, every detail, every shadow, every angle, searching for what did not belong, and then I saw her. On the couch, unconscious, but breathing, her face pale, her hand resting at her side like she had simply fallen asleep in the middle of something she could not finish. "Emily," Lily said, turning her head toward the couch, her voice dropping just enough to carry something new, something fragile. "That is my mom." And in that moment, standing in the doorway between what I knew and what I did not, I realized the call had not been about saving someone from something that was happening. It had been about stepping into something that had already begun long before I arrived. I did not step inside right away because something about the room felt arranged, not staged in the obvious way, but positioned just enough to guide what you saw first and what you did not notice at all, and that kind of detail does not happen by accident. "How long has she been like this?" I asked, my eyes still moving across the apartment, mapping every corner, every surface, every object that might tell me what had happened before I got here. "Since before I called you," Lily said, her voice quiet but clear, like she had already accepted that answer as fact and did not need to question it anymore. I finally crossed the threshold, the door closing softly behind me, and the air inside felt warmer, but not comforting, just contained, like everything that had happened was still sitting in the room waiting to be understood. I moved toward the couch slowly, lowering myself just enough to check her breathing, steady, controlled, not labored, and when I reached for her wrist, her pulse answered immediately, strong, consistent, which told me this was not random, this was not panic, this was something deliberate. "She is going to be okay," I said, not because I was certain, but because the girl behind me needed to hear it. And when I looked up, she was watching me closely, not with relief, not with fear, but with expectation, like she had been waiting for me to confirm something she already believed. "I knew you would say that," she replied, and there was something in her tone that made me pause, something that felt less like trust and more like confirmation. "Why did you call me?" I asked, turning slightly so I could see both of them at once, the stillness of the mother and the calm of the child existing in the same space like two different versions of the same story. Lily tilted her head just a little, like the question did not make sense to her. "Because you answer," she said simply, and for a second, that was all there was, just those 3 words hanging in the air between us, heavier than anything else she could have said. I exhaled slowly, my gaze shifting back to Emily, taking in the details I had not noticed from the doorway, the way her hand rested near the edge of the couch, the faint crease in her sleeve like someone had been holding onto it earlier, the small details that never lie if you know how to read them. "Did she tell you to call me?" I asked, already knowing the answer mattered more than the question itself. Lily shook her head. "No," she said, and this time there was something different in her voice, something softer, something that sounded closer to a child than anything she had said before. "She told me not to call anyone." That made me look at her again, really look at her, at the way she stood, the way she held herself, the way her eyes did not move the way a child's eyes usually do when they are scared. "Then why did you?" I asked, quieter now, because whatever answer she gave next was going to tell me more than anything else in this room. She hesitated, just for a second, the first real hesitation since I arrived, and then she stepped a little closer, her voice dropping like she was sharing something she was not supposed to say out loud. "Because they said your name," she whispered. Everything inside me went still. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice lower now, sharper, not directed at her, but at the realization forming in my mind. "Before they left," she continued, watching me carefully now, like she was measuring my reaction, "they were talking about you. They said if anything went wrong, it would come back to you." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air tighter, like the walls had moved in just enough to remind me exactly where I was standing. I looked back at Emily, at the stillness that no longer felt accidental, and then back at Lily, who had not taken her eyes off me since I walked through that door. "So you called me," I said slowly. She nodded once. "Because if it was about you," she said, her voice steady again, "then you would come." And in that moment, I understood something I should have seen from the very beginning. This was never about finding them. This was about being found. For a moment, I did not move, because when a child repeats your name like that, not with curiosity but with certainty, it means the story started long before you arrived, and I had just walked into the middle of something that already knew me. I stood slowly, my eyes shifting from Lily to the door, then back to Emily, recalculating everything I thought I understood about this situation, because this was no longer a rescue. This was alignment, timing, intention. "What exactly did they say?" I asked, my voice controlled but sharper now, each word measured, deliberate. Lily did not look away. "They said your name like they knew you," she replied, her tone steady, almost observational. "Not like they were scared of you. Like they were expecting you." That landed differently, not as a threat, not even as a warning, but as confirmation of something I had not yet seen clearly. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair, not out of frustration, but to buy a second, just one, to think. "Did they say anything else?" I asked. She nodded once. "One of them said, if she does not cooperate, call it in and let him deal with it." My jaw tightened slightly at that, not visibly, but enough for me to feel it, because that phrase, that exact phrasing, it was not random. It belonged to a structure, a system, one that I did not build but understood well enough to recognize. I turned back toward Emily, studying her again, not as a victim now, but as someone placed in a position, someone who had been part of a decision before she ever lost consciousness. "Emily," I said quietly, though I knew she could not hear me. Not yet, but sometimes names matter even when the person is not awake to answer them. Lily stepped closer again, her small hand lightly touching the edge of my sleeve. Not pulling, not demanding, just making sure I did not forget she was there. "Are they coming back?" she asked, and this time, there it was, the question beneath all the calm, the one she had been holding back since the beginning. I looked down at her, really looked this time, at the strength she was borrowing to stay steady, at the way her shoulders held tension she should not have to carry, and for the first time since I arrived, my answer was not calculated, it was instinct. "Not tonight," I said, my voice quieter, but firm, something she could hold on to. She studied my face for a second, like she was checking for doubt, for hesitation, and when she did not find it, she nodded, just once, like that was enough. I moved back toward the door, pulling my phone from my pocket, not the one she had called, but the one reserved for decisions that change outcomes, and when I dialed, the line picked up on the first ring. "I need a clean team," I said without introduction, my voice low and direct. "No questions. No delays. Send them to this address." There was a pause on the other end, brief but noticeable. "Is this related to the shipment tonight?" the voice asked carefully. I glanced back at Emily, then at Lily, then at the room that no longer felt random in any way. "No," I replied. "This is something else." I ended the call before anything else could be said, because explanations create distance, and right now, distance was not something I could afford. When I turned back, Lily was still watching me, but something in her expression had shifted, not relief, not fear, but something closer to understanding, like she had just realized that whatever this was, it had grown bigger than the moment she made that call. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I looked at her, then at Emily, then at the space around us that had been waiting for me long before I walked through that door, and I answered the only way I could. "Now," I said, my voice steady, certain, "no one touches you without going through me." And as the words left my mouth, I knew they were not just for her, not just for tonight, but for everything that was about to follow. The room felt different after I said it, like something invisible had settled into place, not louder, not heavier, just decided, and I could see it in the way Lily's shoulders dropped a fraction, not because she fully believed me yet, but because she wanted to. I moved back toward the couch, crouching slightly beside Emily again, watching for any change, any sign that she was coming back to awareness, because whatever she knew, whatever she had been pulled into, it did not start tonight, and I needed her awake before anyone else decided to return. "Has she been like this the whole time?" I asked without looking away from Emily's face. "She tried to stand earlier," Lily said softly, stepping closer again, her voice quieter now, more like a child speaking in a room that suddenly felt too serious. "But she said I had to stay quiet, and then she just stopped talking." I nodded once, processing that, placing it into the pattern forming in my mind. Because stopping is not the same as failing. Sometimes it is the only move left when everything else has already been taken away. "She is resting," I said, choosing the word carefully, because it mattered what Lily heard, what she held on to. "Her body is catching up." Lily watched me for a second, then looked back at her mother, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of her sleeve. "She always says that," she murmured, almost to herself. "That resting is not quitting." I glanced at her then, really seeing her again, not just as part of the situation, but as someone shaped by the person lying on that couch, and something about that made the room feel less controlled and more human. A sound outside pulled my attention immediately, not loud, not obvious, just the faint shift of tires against pavement, the kind of sound most people ignore, but I never do. And I stood slowly, my posture changing without thinking, my focus narrowing back to the present. "Stay here," I said quietly, my voice low but firm, and Lily did not argue, did not question. She just nodded and stepped closer to her mother like she had already learned that following instructions was how you stayed safe. I moved to the window, just enough to see the street without being seen, and the car that had pulled up did not belong to anyone in this building, not with the way it idled, not with the way it positioned itself just slightly off the curb, angled for a quick exit if needed. And that confirmed what I already knew. This was not over. It had never been over. I stepped back from the window, my mind already adjusting, already shifting from arrival to control, because whatever had been set in motion here, I was now part of it whether I liked it or not. My phone buzzed once in my hand. A single notification, no name, just confirmation. The team was close, but not here yet, which meant I had minutes, not hours, and minutes are where decisions matter most. I turned back toward Lily and Emily, the space between them and the door suddenly feeling more important than anything else in the room, and I positioned myself there without thinking, not blocking, not guarding, just present, exactly where I needed to be. Lily, I said, keeping my voice steady, controlled, something she could trust even if she did not fully understand it yet. If anyone else knocks on that door, you do not answer. Not for anyone. She looked at me, her expression serious now, the calm she had been holding shifting into something more aware, more grounded. Not even if they say your name? She asked. That question stayed with me for half a second longer than it should have, because it told me she understood more than she should, more than she needed to at her age. Especially then, I replied quietly. She nodded once, accepting that without hesitation, and moved closer to the couch again, her hand finding her mother's sleeve like it was the only constant in a room that kept changing around her. I watched them both for a second, the stillness, the connection, the reason I had not walked away when I still could have, and then I shifted my attention back to the door, to the hallway beyond it, to the space where everything that was coming would have to pass through. And for the first time since the call came in, I was not reacting anymore. I was waiting. The knock came softer than I expected, not urgent, not aggressive, just 2 measured taps against the door like whoever stood on the other side already knew I was here, and that alone told me everything I needed to know. Lily's fingers tightened around her mother's sleeve, but she did not speak, did not move, just watched me the way she had since the beginning, like my reaction would define what happened next. I did not rush to the door, because rushing gives away control, and control was the only thing keeping this moment from slipping into something worse. Instead, I took 1 step closer, then another, my movements slow, deliberate, my attention fixed on the space between the sound and the silence that followed it. Stay behind me, I said quietly, not turning, but I heard her shift, small footsteps against the floor as she moved exactly where I needed her to be. The knock came again, same rhythm, same restraint, and then a voice followed, calm, almost polite. We know you are inside. I closed my eyes for half a second, not out of fear, but recognition, because that tone, that controlled patience, it belonged to someone who was not here to search, not here to guess, but to confirm. I opened my eyes and reached for the handle, not to open it, not yet, but to feel the weight of the moment through something solid, something real. You should not be here. The voice continued, still even, still composed. Like this was a conversation that had already happened somewhere else, and I was just catching up. I let out a slow breath, my mind aligning the pieces faster now. The call, the name, the setup, the timing, all of it fitting together into something that was no longer unclear. You already knew I would be, I replied, my voice carrying through the door without raising it, because I did not need volume to be heard. There was a pause on the other side, not hesitation, but acknowledgement, and when the voice returned, it carried something new, something sharper beneath the calm. Then you understand why this does not involve you. I almost smiled at that, not because it was amusing, but because it was predictable, and predictability is the first weakness in any situation. It involved me the moment you said my name. I answered, my tone steady, final, leaving no space for negotiation. Silence followed, heavier this time, like the conversation had reached a point where words were no longer enough to shift what was already set in motion. Behind me, I could hear Lily's breathing, slower now, more controlled, matching the rhythm I had set without even realizing it, and that grounded me in a way I did not expect. The handle beneath my hand remained still, no attempt to force it, no urgency, just patience, which meant they were waiting for something, a signal, a decision, or maybe just the right moment. My phone buzzed again, once, then twice, a pattern I recognized instantly. The team had arrived, positioned, ready, and for the first time since I stepped into this building, the balance shifted, not completely, not permanently, but enough. I leaned slightly closer to the door, lowering my voice just enough that it carried intention instead of volume. You should leave, I said quietly, the same tone they had used, the same control, the same certainty, Because sometimes the only way to change a conversation is to mirror it back. Another pause, longer now, stretching just enough to feel deliberate, and then a faint exhale from the other side, almost like disappointment. This is not over, the voice said, softer now, but no less certain. It never was, I replied, and this time, I did not wait for a response, because some conversations end without agreement, and that does not make them unfinished, it just means they are moving somewhere else. The footsteps on the other side faded slowly, not rushed, not chaotic, just controlled retreat, and I stayed where I was until the silence returned completely, not trusting the absence of sound until I knew it was real. When I finally stepped back, turning toward Lily and Emily again, the room felt different, not safe, not yet, but claimed, like the line had been drawn and everyone involved knew exactly where it stood. Lily looked at me, her eyes searching my face for something she could hold on to, and I gave her the only thing I could in that moment. They are gone, I said quietly, and for the first time since I arrived, she let out a breath she had been holding for far too long. I stayed where I was for a moment longer even after the silence settled, because silence can lie, it can pretend to be empty when it is not, and I had learned a long time ago that the absence of sound does not always mean the absence of intent. My phone buzzed again. A single confirmation this time, and I stepped toward the door, opening it just enough to see the hallway. Two of my men already positioned at either end, their presence quiet but unmistakable, their eyes scanning without needing instructions. I gave a slight nod and they moved further down, securing the space without a word, and only then did I close the door again, turning back to the room that had changed more in the last 10 minutes than most places do in years. Lily was still beside the couch, her hand resting lightly on her mother's sleeve, but her posture had shifted, not as rigid now, not as guarded, like she was. Slowly allowing herself to believe that the worst part had passed, even if she did not fully understand what that meant yet. They are not coming back tonight, I said again, this time not as a promise, but as a statement, something grounded in what I now controlled. She nodded, her eyes dropping briefly to her mother's face before lifting back to mine. You said that before, she murmured, but there was no doubt in her voice now, only quiet acknowledgement. I stepped closer to the couch again, watching Emily more carefully, because something about her breathing had changed, subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it, a slight shift in rhythm, a sign that whatever had held her under was beginning to loosen its grip. Lily, I said softly, lowering my voice as I crouched beside them. She is going to wake up soon. Lily's head turned quickly at that, her eyes widening just a fraction, not with fear, but with something else, something closer to relief that she had not allowed herself to feel until now. Really? She asked, and for the first time since I arrived, her voice sounded like a child's, not controlled, not measured, just hopeful. I nodded once. Yes. The word felt simple, but in this room, in this moment, it carried weight. I reached out and adjusted the edge of the blanket near Emily's shoulder, a small, almost instinctive movement, something I would not have done an hour ago, something that had nothing to do with control or strategy, just presence. Lily watched me do it, her expression shifting slightly, like she was seeing something she had not expected to see in me. Why are you helping us? She asked quietly, not accusing, not confused, just curious. The question stayed in the air longer than I expected, because the answer was not as simple as it should have been. I looked at Emily, then back at Lily, and for a moment, I considered giving her something easy, something that would make sense to her, but I did not. Because you called me, I said instead, my voice low, honest in a way I was not used to. She studied my face for a second, like she was deciding if that was enough, and then she nodded slowly, accepting it in a way that felt far too mature for someone her age. Hey! Faint sound came from the couch, barely more than a breath, but it was enough to pull both of our attention instantly. Emily's fingers moved slightly, just a small twitch, but it was real, and Lily's hand tightened around hers immediately. Mom, she whispered, leaning closer, her voice soft but urgent in a way that carried hope instead of fear. I watched closely, every detail, every shift, because whatever Emily said when she woke up would not just explain what had happened, it would define what came next. Her eyelids fluttered once, then again, slower this time, like she was pulling herself back from somewhere far away, and when they finally opened, her gaze unfocused at first, then sharpening as she took in the room, the ceiling, the unfamiliar shape of me standing beside her. Her eyes moved quickly, searching, until they found Lily, and something in her expression changed instantly, tension giving way to recognition. "Lily," she breathed, her voice rough but steady enough to hold the name, and Lily leaned closer immediately, relief breaking through everything she had been holding back. "I am here," she said softly. Emily's gaze shifted then, slowly, deliberately, until it landed on me, and the moment our eyes met, everything in the room seemed to pause again, not from silence this time, but from understanding. She did not look confused. She did not look surprised. She looked like she had been expecting this. "You came," she said quietly, her voice carrying something I could not quite place yet. Not relief. Not fear. Something deeper. Something that told me this was never just about Lily making a call. I held her gaze for a second, then answered the only way I could. "You already knew I would." And in the way her expression shifted, in the way her eyes did not leave mine, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else that had happened tonight. This was not the beginning of the story. This was the moment it finally caught up to me. For a second, no one moved. Not me, not Lily, not even Emily. Because sometimes the most important moments are not loud. They are quiet. They sit between breaths, waiting for someone to decide what they mean. Told me more than anything she could have said. "You should not be here," she said softly, her voice still rough but gaining strength with every word. And there was no panic in it, no confusion, just a quiet certainty, like she was stating a fact she had already accepted. I tilted my head slightly, studying her, not as someone I had just met, but as someone who had been part of something I was only now beginning to see clearly. "And yet," I replied, my voice calm, measured, "you expected me to come." Her gaze flickered for a fraction of a second, not away, but inward, like she was deciding how much to say, how much to reveal in a moment that was already carrying too much weight. Lily's hand tightened around hers, grounding her, pulling her back into the room, into the present. "Mom," Lily whispered, her voice softer now, but filled with something stronger than before, something steady, something safe. Emily turned her head slightly toward her, her expression softening immediately, the tension easing from her features as she focused on the one thing that mattered most. "I am here," she said gently, her fingers curling just enough to return the pressure of Lily's hand, and for a moment, the room shifted again, not controlled, not strategic, just human. I stepped back slightly, giving them space, but not distance, because distance was not something I was willing to allow anymore, not after everything that had just unfolded. "They came looking for you," Emily said after a moment, her eyes lifting back to mine, her voice quieter now, but clearer, like each word was being placed exactly where it needed to be. "Not for me. For you." That did not surprise me, not anymore. But hearing it from her confirmed what had been forming in the background of every decision I had made since that call. "Then they should have come prepared," I answered simply, not as a threat, not as a statement of power, just as a fact, something that did not need to be emphasized to be understood. Emily studied me for a second, longer this time, her gaze sharper now, more focused, like she was measuring something she had not been able to before. "You do not understand," she said quietly, and there was something in her tone that made me pause, not because it was uncertain, but because it was not. "This was never about stopping you. It was about bringing you here." The words settled into the room slowly, heavier than anything else that had been said, because they did not just explain what had happened, they redefined it completely. I looked at Lily, then back at Emily, and for the first time since I walked through that door, I allowed the possibility that I had not been reacting to events, but following them. "Why?" I asked, my voice lower now, not demanding, but deliberate, because whatever answer she gave next was going to change everything that came after. Emily exhaled slowly, her grip on Lily's hand steady, her eyes never leaving mine. "Because there is something you do not know," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "And they were running out of time to keep you from finding out." The room felt smaller again, not from pressure, but from clarity, like the edges of the situation had finally come into focus, and I was standing exactly where I was meant to be, whether I had chosen it or not. "Then tell me," I said, stepping closer again, not out of urgency, but because distance no longer made sense between us. Emily held my gaze for a second longer, then shook her head slightly, a small movement, but decisive. Not here, she said quietly. Not tonight. Lily looked between us, her eyes moving from her mother to me, sensing the shift even if she did not understand the details, and she tightened her grip just slightly, like she was holding on to both of us at the same time. I glanced toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the world outside that was no longer separate from what was happening in this room, and then back at them. Then you are coming with me, I said, not as a question, not as an option, but as the only path that made sense now. Emily did not argue. She did not hesitate. She simply nodded once, like she had been waiting for me to say it. I know, she replied softly. And in that moment, I understood something I had not fully accepted until now. This was not about protecting them anymore. This was about stepping into something that had already chosen me long before that phone ever rang.